Right away, a more nuanced approach today coming from Secretary Hillary Clinton, who was in Munich and said that she supports Vice President Omar Suleiman, but that the transition and democracy takes time and it should be more calm. And correctly, as you said, the U.S. envoy then saying something hours ago that took everybody by surprise, suggesting that Mubarak should play a role in this so-called transition. Let's take a listen to what Ambassador Wisner had to say.
The president must stay in office in order to steer those changes through. I therefore believe that President Mubarak's continued leadership is critical. It's his opportunity to write his own legacy. He's given 60 years of his life to the service of his country. This is an ideal moment for him to show the way forward.
Monica, is there any possibility that we're going to get any further statements now from the American administration to sort of, you might say, set the record straight?
Well, it is possible, but we're not expecting any statement from any top U.S. official in any case, Sohail. I do know that the White House Situation Room is monitoring what's going on in Egypt very closely. It's a 24-hour job, and they have said that they will wake the president up if they feel that there's any significant development, and then his position may change again. It's a very fluid situation, and they are reacting as such. That's the impression we get in any case.
Well, for the moment, Monica, thanks very much for joining us and bringing us up to speed there from Washington, D.C. Well, yesterday, the Italian Prime Minister called him wise. Today, Hosni Mubarak received some more words of support, this time coming from the President of Israel, Shimon Peres.
In spite of all the attacks against President Mubarak, I know him for many years throughout his presidency, and I credit him with one of the persons who saved many lives by preventing war in the Middle East. He saved life of Egyptians, of Arabs, of Israelis, by not allowing to renew a war. No matter what is now the criticism against him, his contribution for peace, as far as I'm concerned, will never be forgotten.
Well, still much more to come on the programme, including accident or act of sabotage. Egyptian authorities try to figure out what caused this explosion on a key gas pipeline. And guilty of corruption, the International Cricket Council bans 3 Pakistani players from the game.
Hello there. Well, we've still got torrential rain falling for many of us across Australia. Have a look at the satellite picture because it shows where our old cyclone is. This is Yasi, or the remains of it, gradually making their way towards the west. But they've really intensified this frontal system down in the southeast corner. So heavy downpours we've seen out of this. We have seen flooding in Victoria. Slowly, though, it's going to work its way eastwards as we head through Sunday. That means for Melbourne, it should be a lot drier. However, this area of wet weather across the central belt is still going to be with us, and it's going to stay around as we head through Monday as well. So more heavy downpours to come here all the way through South Australia, and there could be some flooding as well. For New Zealand, well, here it's actually been quite quiet over the past few days. Generally, the wind's coming in from the west, dragging in quite a lot of moisture. So there's a lot of cloud around, a few spots of drizzle, but there hasn't been anything particularly heavy. It's going to change as we head through the day on Monday. The wet weather's pushing its way northward, so heavy downpours there for the South Island, particularly, I think, in the western parts of the country. Up towards the southeastern parts of Asia, and here we've got lots more in the way of wet weather again, particularly heavy for the southern parts of the Philippines and down through Borneo. That's where it's been really wet over the past couple of days. More rain still to come here. Meanwhile, up in China, it's mostly fine and dry.
A popular uprising that shook the country to its core. A defiant president under siege from his people. As the protesters took charge of the streets, we look back at the events that are changing Egypt.
I will stay on the air if I can until the police come.
In a special program, Al Jazeera gives you a day-by-day account from those that witnessed them firsthand. Egypt burning, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. You're watching Al Jazeera's extended coverage of the ongoing turmoil in Egypt. A reminder of the latest developments. A senior US official has backed Hosni Mubarak's insistence on staying in power until September. Ambassador Frank Wisner said Mubarak's leadership was crucial for an orderly transition. But a spokesperson for the US State Department said that he was not speaking for the government. Also, the leadership of the ruling National Democratic Party has resigned, according to Egyptian state television, and party veteran Hossam Badrawi has taken over as the NDP's Secretary General. Well, let's cross now to London to speak to Nabila Ramdani, a journalist and commentator on North African affairs. Of course, you've been following events not just in Egypt but across the Middle East over the last few weeks. It's been very, very interesting. Hillary Clinton said in Munich today that conditions were right for the perfect storm in the Middle East. What do you make to her comments, and would you agree with them?
Well, I think what we've seen lately is a series of preemptive measures taken by autocrats in the region to try to diffuse potential and larger popular protests across the region. In Jordan, for example, the king changed his prime minister. In Syria, for example, the government made sure that the prices for basic commodities were at a more reasonable price. So they are trying desperately to make sure that the kind of scenes that we're seeing in the streets of on the streets of Egypt
do
not happen.
Nabila, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think that the moves that are being made in countries like Algeria, where the state of emergency that's been there for 19 years may soon be quashed, the changes in government in Jordan, do you think these moves are going to have a long-term effect, or do you think these countries will have some sporadic sort of demonstration, even if it doesn't get to the stage of what we've seen in Tunisia and what we're seeing in Egypt?
Well, clearly the countries around Egypt feel very much threatened by what's happening in Egypt. And dare I say, all these governments are taking short. They're looking at the short-term answers to their problems. I do not believe that it's going to fix anything in the long term. These countries need more profound and major socio and economic and indeed political reforms, which will guarantee social justice in the end, because that's what it's all about.
There's another issue here that's prevailing in lots of conversation with analysts that we're having on Al Jazeera, and that's the position of the US. We're seeing a miscommunication here between the government at the moment and their intended envoy who went to Egypt and now is saying that he thinks Mubarak should stay till September. The American government denying that he's speaking on behalf of the government. That's one big issue that's now being talked about, but also the role of the US in these areas and with these governments, and that they're going to have to change tack at some stage as to how they deal with these autocratic regimes that they've supported.
Indeed, and the United States have been sending very mixed messages since the beginning, stating to begin with that Egypt was a stable country, then pushing for the introduction of reforms, then urging President Mubarak to move towards an interim, the setting up of an interim government. But what's the U.S. envoy's made clear today is he spoke openly and in public about what was really going on behind the scenes in private. So it doesn't come as a surprise when you're aware of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. It hasn't been a force for democracy in that region, quite the opposite. It has always been very supportive of autocrat regimes because they suited their interest in the region, and that's very obvious.
Well, for the moment, Nabila Ramdani, thank you very much for your thoughts and insight, and we shall look to see what happens in the future. Thank you. Well, Egypt's gas supplies to Israel and Jordan have been restricted after an explosion on a pipeline that runs through North Sinai. Company officials say the blast was caused by a leak and was not an attack, but state television described it as a big terrorist operation. Both Jordan and Israel said they expect gas supplies to be disrupted for several days. Time now for some other news. Making the headlines from around the world. At least 2 people were killed when police fired on protesters